Yes, I never used from the very beginning the concepts of spring and even revolution, because revolution means for me much more than what we are witnessing. And this is what I was saying at the beginning. And I think that up to now, unfortunately, I was more right than wrong with what we are now seeing on the ground in Egypt and in Tunisia. What we were expecting and talking about, this movement in MENA, North African country, in the Middle East, changing everything, it's not happening. More than that, what I was saying also after studying the facts is that all this perception that nothing was known by the West and it came all of a sudden out of nothing, or economic or socio-economic problems, this was not true. We have facts now, and they are confirmed also with what is happening in Syria. That Freedom House, Albert Einstein Institute, the State Department in the States, but also many institutions and transnational institutions, and Google themselves, they train people to push towards what they were calling democratizing the Middle East. And we didn't take seriously George W. Bush when he said it in 2003. He said it. So here we have people pushing and states pushing, and we have to ask ourselves why. Because they were controlling the dictators before, controlling Ben Ali, Mubarak, and even dealing with Gaddafi, because he came back into the international scene. And in fact, the problem that we had from the beginning is that we were thinking in political terms, not in geostrategic and economic terms. Because for the States as well as for Europe, they were losing ground in the region with the presence of new actors, among them the BRIC countries, as we know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, add to this Indonesia, Malaysia, South Africa, and Turkey are new players in the country, in the region. So I think that if we look at the political dimensions, we are misled. And if you look now at what is happening in Egypt and now at what is happening in Tunisia, you can get it. That in fact it's not about the political structures. Tunisia is in an assisted economy now. It's just impossible for Tunisia to survive if they don't have the support of the Western countries, and especially World Bank and the IMF. Exactly the same with Egypt. So all this discussion about the state, the nature of the state, not getting, for example, with the discussion with the new constitution in Egypt, that what is the more important thing is the economic sector, with also the new role for the army within the civil state. And this has to do with geostrategy. So the whole process is far from being, revolutionary. It's a new positioning. Now, to say everything was manipulated, no, but it was pushed. And what we can see is that no one was expecting the Syrian citizens to be so courageous and to take to the street. This is why for 8 months, the American administration and the European administrations were asking Bashar al-Assad to reform, and even the Turkish Prime Minister was hoping that it will be a reform from within, up to the point that they realized it's not going to happen, and the people were ready to die. So what is not manipulated is the awakening, the intellectual awakening, the sense for the people that we can remove a dictator. And this is irreversible. This is what is gained from the whole process. But this kind of romanticized, way of dealing with revolutions and the spring, where is the spring? Which country is succeeding today? Tunisia is destabilized. Libya is fractured. Egypt is unsettled. Syria is a civil war. Yemen, there are tensions and sectarian realities. Jordan is unstable. Where is the spring we are talking about? It's clear that in the streets and taking to the streets in Milan al-Tahrir in Egypt or in Tunisia, there were a great deal of women involved. And even if you look at what was happening in, the first country where we had this kind of internet and, social networks was Iran, and the women were very much involved. So it's clear now with this mobilization with Asma, who was told in Egypt don't go to Midan al-Tahrir on the 25th of January, and she said, she was told, don't go, you are a woman, and she responded by saying, I am a woman, so show me if you are a man, you come and you join me. Meaning by this, she was ready for the fight, and she was ready for, and I think that there is an awareness here that the driving force, one of the driving forces within the whole process was the presence of women, and this is very important. Now, does it mean, you know, to have a resistance process as we had with women being involved is one thing. It's another thing to look at what can come afterwards with the presence of women in building the country. And if you look at Tunisia, for example, it's still marginal, the role of women. It's very marginal in Egypt. It's still a very male post-uprising process. It's a male dimension. And we also have to ask ourselves, because the West is portraying, they are doing now what they did also with Turkey after Erdogan took over, saying, oh, the country is going to be Islamized, and you will see headscarves everywhere. So for them, headscarves mean Islamization. Islamization means less rights for women. And my answer to this is completely opposite, is to say, you are not free depending on the way you dress. You are free on two conditions. First is access to education. Are the women as educated, or are they access to education as men have? In North African countries, not the case. You, for example, in Turkey, it's now a reality that the more educated women, and they are doing better than men, by being as educated and better educated. Now, in North African countries, it's not the case. In the Middle East, it's not the case. Even though, for example, in Iran, after 30 years of this revolution, you can agree or not with the revolution, but you cannot deny the fact that the women are much more involved in the public sphere, in the political landscape, and they are very much educated. What is missing, and this is the second point on which, the second parameter on which we can evaluate if we are dealing with empowering women, yes or no, is the access to the job market. And the access to the job market is essential, because this is where you get your social recognition, your financial autonomy, and something which is your freedom. This is why you get freedom. If you look at all what is happening now after the uprisings, is not there. It's not enough there. We don't have a policy based on liberating from political oppression and emancipating from male discrimination. So we still, it's positive as a process is not achieved as a project. You know, this is the very old rhetoric coming from the dictators and coming from Western administrations, saying, look, we better go with dictators, because if we don't have the dictators, we will have worse than them. And worse than them means Islamists and dogmatic Islamists and people who are completely closed and not Democrats. This is the rhetoric that we have for 40 years. It was said in Egypt. Mubarak was saying, if it's not me, it's going to be the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood are not moderate, because there is nothing like moderate Islamists. Moderate Islamist is a contradiction in terms. This is what he was selling, and very quickly this was bought by the West and promoted as such, and exactly the same with Ben Ali in Tunisia. Now what we can see, and this is something also which is very important, is that the counter power coming even from the Islamists are not autocrats, and they are not tyrants, and they are not dictators. It doesn't mean, because you are not dictators, that you are now ready to deal with the democratic process. It's a long and you also it's a very long process, and you have to take into account the conflicting forces within the society. Look at what is happening in Tunisia and in Egypt, where you have the Islamists and Nahda, or the Muslim Brotherhood. You have the Salafi, and the Salafi are also pushed, and these are the literalist Salafi, and you have the jihadists as well, going towards, you know, more violence. You have the secularists that are pushing in one direction, and you have the army. So the country is just, the forces and the political forces are scattered in a way. So what the risk is not, because there is this popular awareness that they don't want dictators again, but it's scattered. They were united again, they are scattered for what they want afterwards. And there are political forces that are playing from within, as well as also pushed from outside, who is pushing in that direction to make this region remaining very fragile. At the end of the day, the reality of the Middle East today is that the spring that we were announcing ended up being a very fragile Middle East and North African countries. For the sake of whom? There is something that happened, is that the political structures are shaken and the economic market is open, much more open than what we thought. And it might be this is the point of the whole process, is I don't think that the West is caring about democracy. It's caring about interests and markets. So if not, the first countries to be liberated should be the petromonarchies, because this is where the people are not experiencing democracy and money is there. They don't care about that. So there is a way of reading the prism through which we have to read this is twofold. And I kept on repeating this in the book and also in articles that I wrote afterwards, is we should not blame the West for everything, but we should not be naive with the West in the whole process. We should not buy very quickly that the West is for democracy. On the other side, the first to be blamed also in the whole dynamic is also the political leaders and the intellectuals in the Arab world that are not showing leadership as to what do we want. It's polarizing the debates between secularists and Islamists. You don't talk about the real issues, and that's problematic. Once again, we cannot deny the fact that it's there. When I was talking to people when I was in Tunisia, or even when I came to Turkey, very often Turkish people or Tunisian people or even Egyptian people are saying, oh, the West is portraying us into two groups, the secularists versus the Islamists. I'm sorry, it's not only the West that is doing this. You yourself are doing it, because this is the way you go in Turkey, and you have tensions between the two groups, exactly the same with the elite in Tunisia or in Egypt. Everywhere now we have this. And so we cannot deny this. Now, not to deny this reality doesn't mean that we accept it as it is and we fall into the trap of this very simplistic polarization of the political debate in the society. Because we end up having secularists saying to the Islamists, you are backward, you are the guardian of the tradition and you are not ready for democracy. This is a religious, you are theocrats. So they are pushing them in the tradition and saying we are the progressive. On the other side, the Islamists are saying to the secularists, you are westernized and you are playing for the game of the foreign forces, and we are the guardian of religion. And we end up having a political discussion between two groups. Every one of them is getting its justification by the presence of the other, but not with coming with a policy, with a vision. So I think that this is where the current government in Turkey succeeded, by being very efficient and to go beyond these discussions. At the end of the day, that doesn't matter. What matters is the economic success, the political success. And I would say that what is happening in Egypt and in Tunisia is still very far from that. We are in this type of polarization that is just making the whole political discussion very sterile and not very much tackling the issues that have to be tackled. So that's a good question. You had the personal advisor to Erdogan once. We were together in the Middle East, and he said, the question is not to ask if Muslims are ready for democracy or the Arabs are ready for democracy. The question is to ask if the West is ready for the Arabs to be democrats and to live with democracy. And it's a good question, because at the end, do we really want democracies and transparent democracies? Do, for example, the foreign countries, the great powers of today, want democracy? Are they ready for that? Because they have been supporting dictators that were protecting their interests. What does it mean if we have true transparent democracies in the Middle East? No one can deny the fact that 80 to 90% of the people are not happy with the Israeli policy, that they are rejecting what the Israelis are doing, what they did in Gaza. So there is a popular support towards the Palestinians, and they would not be very happy with the way the government and even Mubarak and Ben Ali were dealing with the issue. So true democracies in the region would mean to question the Israeli policy and the way they are dealing with Palestinians. So this is why we have to differentiate between what would be the ideal democratic state and what is the reality today. Is in fact, in every country they are facing so many problems that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a secondary issue, and they are not going to change anything. What you can hear now coming from Morsi and the leadership in Egypt, they don't want to touch the agreement. Tunisia exactly the same. And even in Turkey, we might say it's good because Erdogan is taking symbolic positionings and having very strong statement about what but in practical terms, this is not changing the reality of their relationship. It's just symbolic statements, and the Arabs are emotional, so they go for that. But this is not what we are talking about. We are talking about real policies that are supporting the rights of the Palestinians. And I would say transparent democracies would have helped. What we have now with this very fragile situation in the Middle East is very much helping the Israeli agenda as to carry on colonization, to deal with the divide between the Shia and the Sunni. In Syria, for example, was the fact that you have Syria, Iran, and Lebanon isolated now, and in a situation of weakness. You don't have anything coming from the Sunni countries that could be of a support towards the Palestinians. So, unsaturated situation in the Middle East, divide between Shia and Sunni, and then economic weakness that needs the support of the Bretton Woods institution. What can you expect more than that for the Israeli project in the region? And it might be that we are thinking the wrong way if we think that Israel is not happy with what is happening. I don't think that there is a relationship between Salafism and literalism and extremism in Iran. I think that Iran now is in the middle of this fracture between Sunni and Shia. By the way, for example, they are supporting Bashar al-Assad, and so there is something, and the way also, the petromonarchies in Saudi Arabia was even asking the Americans to deal with Iran, to cut the head of the snake, as it was said by the King Abdullah. So it was very tough. So there is something at stake here that we have to take into account. But I wouldn't say that this has an impact with the kind of radicalization and violent extremism, because very often the Salafi that are pushed in that direction are mainly not coming from the Iranian side of the equation, but the Salafi and the Sunni side of the equation. The great majority of the people who are radicalized are very often coming from the Salafi, sometimes literalists and sometimes violent extremists. So this is something which is going to be a challenge for the Sunni from within. How do we deal with the Salafi literalists, and how do we deal with the jihadists? And we have a very important example, very, very dangerous situation in northern Mali, where you have these Salafi jihadists that are now, they took over half of the country, and they are implementing, the penal code and in a way which is unacceptable. This is not Islamic, it's not our religion. And yet we still have to ask the true questions. How come every time we found resources, oil, gas, and wealth somewhere, you have the literalists, radicals, and extremists settling there? How come they arrived in Afghanistan, where we found lithium and gas and all this, and they are there? As if with their presence they are justifying the presence of power that can take advantage of the situation. Northern Mali, 5 years ago, they found oil resources that are as wealthy as the resources in Libya. And all of a sudden we have radicals settling there. And there is a call now to intervene. The Americans, the French are ready to do this. So you have to be a bit cautious and not to be naive. We have violent extremist Muslims. Yes, we have them. But sometimes they are instrumentalized for something which is bigger than them. And we have also to get that right. I have been following the situation in Turkey for the last 20 years. Even before that, with the first trend of, the resistance with Erbakan and his vision of a political economic resistance with the DH that he wanted to create. And then Erdogan came, and there is a gap between what he is doing now and what was done before. And then there is a point which is important, that he has been very successful on 3 fields. The first one is to be able to act against corruption and to try to have more transparent political processes within society. And this is true. It's not perfect, and still we have a lot to do in Turkey, and even for what is related to freedom, we still have to deal with some of these issues. But there is a trend here which is important. The second is the way the current government dealt with the army. In fact, all this discussion with the EU, to integrate EU and to be part of the EU, was very smart, because this is from where they were able to say to the army, if you stay where you are, we are not able to enter. So in EU standards, your position is problematic. So it was playing against the army that was advocating the secular, by saying the secular that is advocated by the EU is not the secular system advocated by the army. So you better find the right place. So this is something that happened over the last 7 years that is very important, because this is where the country is moving towards something which is a true democratic process, and not a democratic process under the authority of the army as a guardian. That's not a democratic process. When the army is protecting democracy, it's a problem. So the third thing is in economic terms, and this is where I think the Turkish model was successful. They are winning the election because they are successful in economic terms, and they are making much better even than the great majority, if not all, the European countries. Having said that, we have to compare the like with the like. What Egypt is experiencing now, or Tunisia, they don't have the same assets, and they don't have the same history, and they don't have the same potential. So what is a model is with people saying, we have an Islamic reference, but we have now to open up what is the Islamic reference, to understand with whom we are playing, is to understand the environment. So this is good. This is a good question, and this is a good way to put it. Now, the choices that are made within the society as to what are the priorities, the choices to be integrated into the international global economic order, this could be disputable. I would dispute this by saying, which type of alternative are you proposing? And the Turkish on this are not very much proposing something, except that what I saw over the last few years, it's interesting, this shift towards the south and east, opening embassies in Africa, opening channels with China, India, Malaysia. Now, it's quite interesting. So I wouldn't judge too quickly, but I think we still have to remain critical of the Turkish experience in a positive way, in a constructive way, not as denying that nothing was, many things have been done right and good. But the future of ethics in politics is not to fall into the trap of competing with the global economy as if this is the right thing to do. And the second is not to buy the security measures that are imposed by the West as being ours, and everything which has to do with NATO. and everything has to do with the way we deal with security could be problematic. And the last point is, beyond the symbolic attitude towards Israel, what is really done by Turkey to help this conflict to be solved? I think it's a revealing reality. The fact that the EU is refusing to integrate Turkey reveals lots of things. First, it's clear that they have an economic concern by saying, you know, there are millions of Turkish people who can come, and it's going to be unbalanced as to the reality of the cultural relationship within Turkey, within the European Union. The second is about the perception that Islam is not a European religion, and Turks are mainly Muslims. So it's welcoming an alien element within the European continent. So it's revealing the narrative. The European narrative is not today encompassing the Turkish factor or the Turkish element. And the Islamic one is also something which has to do with a problem here in the way Islam is perceived as a non-European religion. So we have to be very, very deep in this analysis. How the Turkish experience, how the Turkish memory, how the Turkish history, how the Turkish landscape as to the religions is part of Europe. And this is where the Turkish intellectuals, the Turkish politicians, the Turkish journalists should be much more assertive as to the European dimension of this experience. It's not done enough. It's very much done in economic terms to integrate EU, but EU it's not it's not representing the fundamentals of the European experience. It's just a structure, which, by the way, is not really democratic. It's not. So it's, you know, deputies, parliamentaries that are taking decisions far from the people. The great majority of the Europeans are not happy with EU as a structure. They're saying, who is deciding for whom? You know? So it might be that the Turkish should talk more to peoples than to institutions. That's a very important point. Talk to the people, because the people can get you much more than if you only talk to the structures. The structures are based on all what I said now, which is problematic. This situation needs to be tackled and an answer. And I think that beyond the Turkish emotions, whereas there is something in the history, in the memory of the Turkish nation, which has to do with, it's not the same, but there is something which is a very quick emotional reaction when we speak about Armenia and when we speak about the Kurds. It's as if, oh, something is at stake here, it's dangerous. It is dangerous if we keep on tackling it in emotional terms. Now, we should deal with it in political terms. There are rights and there are minorities, and we know that some are acting to divide and pushing to divide. That's clear. We know that there are forces, they want to divide, and there are claims that are not very sincere in political terms. That's the situation. But if we want to solve the problem, we should be clear and consistent with our principles. Freedom of expression, the freedom of minorities to be accepted and respected within the society. These are things that should be much more open as to space where the current Turkish government should be more consistent. The current Turkish government is doing very well on many issues, but still we are expecting from this government to be consistent when it comes to dealing with minorities, to be consistent when it comes to transition, political transition. And as you know, I keep on repeating this and telling them, you know what, you said to the world, you should leave, you should learn to leave. And I repeat it to the Turkish people. It's good to be elected, it's good to run the country when you are elected, but history should teach you, you should learn to leave. Even if you are successful. And part of your success is to leave at the right time and not to stay too long.